Under the dying glow of a golden evening, the neighborhood looked like something out of a real estate commercial: perfect lawns, trimmed hedges, driveways lined with spotless cars, but perfection has a way of hiding poison. At the very end of that peaceful cul-de-sac stood a modest brick home owned by Samuel Carter, a 62-year-old black veteran who had seen more of life, death, and sacrifice than any of his neighbors could imagine. On his porch hung a glass case, neat, polished, sacred, holding medals, ribbons, and a folded flag given to him at his brother's funeral. To Samuel, it wasn't decoration. It was memory. It was honor. It was the only piece of the past he refused to bury. But to the Homeowners Association, it was an unauthorized modification. A violation of community aesthetics. In other words, an eyesore. The first letter came like a slap: remove the display within 14 days or face a fine of $500 per week. Samuel read it twice, lips tightening, eyes calm but burning with quiet disbelief. He had faced enemy fire overseas, dragged bleeding comrades through sand and smoke, and now he was being fined for remembering them. The man behind the letter? Charles Whitman, HOA president. Mid-50s, pressed khakis, polo shirts tucked too tightly into his waistband, walking around with a clipboard like he owned the world. To him, authority was a game, and power was the prize. He strutted through the streets measuring lawns, pointing out chipped paint, threatening fines over mailbox colors. And when he saw Samuel's metal display, he saw defiance. Something that didn't fit his vision of order. One evening, Samuel stood on his porch cleaning the glass case when Charles approached, clipboard in hand, his smirk as sharp as the creases in his shirt. "Mr. Carter," he said, voice dripping arrogance, "this isn't a military base. This is a neighborhood of standards. Your little shrine violates HOA policy." Samuel looked up, silent for a long beat, then replied evenly, "Those medals represent men who died keeping your neighborhood free." Charles scoffed. "Then keep them inside. We don't need reminders of war out here." Samuel's jaw tightened. "Freedom isn't a reminder. It's the reason we're standing here." He turned and went inside. But Charles wasn't done. Over the next week, the fines came daily. Then the threats: non-compliance will result in legal action. Then one night, the sound of shattering glass woke Samuel. He rushed to the porch and froze. The display was destroyed. The flag lay crumpled in the dirt. His hands shook as he gathered each medal from the ground. There was no note, but he didn't need one. He knew exactly who had done it. The next morning, he didn't call the police. He didn't yell. He simply repaired what he could, cleaned the flag, and waited. At the next HOA meeting, the clubhouse was full: tired neighbors, frustrated by endless fines, whispers about Charles's bullying. At the front, Charles sat smugly with his gavel. But when Samuel walked in, every eye turned. He carried the folded flag in his arms. "I'd like to speak," Samuel said. Charles frowned. "You're not on the agenda." But the crowd murmured, "Let him talk." And so he did. He told them about the Bronze Star, earned dragging 2 wounded soldiers through a field under enemy fire. About the Purple Heart, shrapnel still buried near his spine. About the folded flag, the one handed to him when his younger brother never came home. As he spoke, the room fell silent. Even those who had once nodded to Charles's rules now stared in shame. Charles tried to cut him off. "Rules are rules, Mr. Carter," but before he could finish, voices rose. "Have some respect," someone shouted. "He fought for this country," another yelled. The gavel slammed uselessly as the crowd turned against him. Years of quiet fear broke in a wave of outrage. One neighbor stood up. Then another. Then the entire room rose, clapping. Samuel lifted the flag high and said, "This isn't leaving my porch. Not today. Not ever. Because it doesn't belong to me, it belongs to every man and woman who gave their last breath for the freedom you enjoy." If your rulebook can't respect that, maybe it's not freedom you're protecting, maybe it's control. Applause thundered. The vote was called. And for the first time in the HOA's history, the president's decision was overturned. Fines rescinded. The rule rewritten. Neighbors offered to help rebuild the display. One woman brought flowers. A child asked about the medals. For the first time in years, Samuel smiled, not because he'd won, but because they finally understood. Charles, however, sat frozen, face red, gavel limp in his hand. His little empire had crumbled. That night, Samuel sat on his porch beneath the repaired glass case, flag gleaming beneath the porch light. He thought the war was over. Until a black sedan rolled to a slow stop by the curb. A man in a dark suit stepped out, calm and composed. He flashed a badge. "Mr. Carter." Samuel stood, wary but polite. "That's me." "Name's Agent Daniels, Department of Justice," the man said, lowering his voice. "We've been watching Charles Whitman for some time. Turns out your case isn't the first. Veterans across the state, same harassment, same tactics, even attempts to seize homes through fraudulent liens." He handed Samuel a thick file. "We think your stand might be what finally exposes him." Samuel flipped through the pages, photos of veterans, documents, evidence of years of abuse. His stomach turned. "He's been doing this to others." "For years," Daniel said grimly. "And now, thanks to you, we have a trail." Before Samuel could respond, headlights cut across the porch. A second car pulled up, black, tinted windows. Two men stepped out, suits too sharp, faces too calm. Danielle's tone shifted. "You expecting company?" Samuel's instincts, honed by war, kicked in instantly. "No," he said softly, eyes narrowing. The two men stopped at the edge of the yard. One reached into his coat. The porch light flickered. Daniels whispered, "They're not with me." Samuel took a slow breath, the kind he used to take before a mission, before chaos. The quiet before the storm. Respect can be demanded by fear, but honor is forged through truth. And when truth threatens power, power will always send its shadows. Samuel squared his shoulders, gaze fixed on the men approaching. "Looks like the war's not over after all," he muttered. The night air hung thick with tension, the kind that tastes like rain before a storm. Samuel Carter stood on his porch, the flag behind him glowing faintly in the porch light. Two men in dark suits approached from the street, silent, deliberate, too calm to be anything but dangerous. Agent Daniels stood beside him, one hand hovering near his briefcase, voice low but steady. "Stay sharp. They're not here to talk." The taller of the two strangers smirked as he stepped into the light. "Evening, gentlemen," he said, his tone smooth but dripping with menace. "Mr. Whitman sends his regards. He doesn't appreciate federal interference, or stubborn veterans who don't know when to quit." Samuel didn't move. His eyes were cold, steady, unflinching. "Tell Charles Whitman he should have learned a long time ago, threats don't work on soldiers." The man's smirk faltered. "You think this is about threats? This is about cleanup." Daniels reached inside his jacket slowly. "Careful," he warned. "You don't want to do this." A flash of headlights cut across the yard, another car pulling up fast. The men spun around, startled, as doors slammed and two more figures stepped out, local police. But not just any police. The same officers who had once ignored Samuel's complaints when his display was vandalized. Now, their faces were tense, wary. The officer in front barked, "Everyone step away. Hands where I can see them." The two suited men hesitated, eyes darting between Samuel, Daniels, and the cops. The tension cracked like glass. One of the men lunged, not toward Samuel, but toward Daniel's briefcase. Samuel moved on instinct, stepping between them, his hand shooting out like lightning, grabbing the man's wrist, twisting until a sharp snap echoed. The man howled, collapsing to the ground. The second man turned to run but was tackled by one of the officers. Daniels exhaled hard, his briefcase still in his grasp. "Guess you still remember your training." Samuel glanced down at the groaning man clutching his arm. "Some lessons you don't forget." The police cuffed the two men, radioing for backup. One officer turned to Samuel. "Mr. Carter, I didn't realize this was what was happening. We owe you an apology." Samuel gave a faint nod. "You owe it to the next person he targets. Make it right." Hours later, inside the county courthouse, Samuel and Agent Daniels sat across from a nervous clerk as boxes of files were stacked high. Evidence, years of fraudulent liens, false fines, and veteran-targeted harassment tied directly to Charles Whitman and his associates. "This isn't just HOA corruption," Daniels said, flipping through documents. "This is organized discrimination under the guise of local governance. They used bylaws as weapons." Samuel looked down at one of the photos, a veteran in a wheelchair, home foreclosed by the same HOA network Whitman led. His jaw tightened. "Then it ends tonight." The next morning, the community woke to chaos. News vans lined the streets. Reporters swarmed the cul-de-sac as federal agents stormed Charles Whitman's home. Cameras flashed as boxes of records were carried out. Neighbors peeked from windows, whispering in disbelief. The man who once fined them for mailbox paint now stood in handcuffs, face pale, jaw trembling. "Mr. Whitman," a reporter shouted, "do you have anything to say about the veterans you targeted?" Charles tried to look defiant, but his voice cracked. "This is a misunderstanding." The reporter cut him off. "The Department of Justice doesn't raid for misunderstandings." From across the street, Samuel stood silently, watching. The folded flag was under his arm. When Charles saw him, his face twisted in fury. "You think you've won?" he hissed as he was shoved into a patrol car. "You're just another pawn. They'll forget you in a week." Samuel didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because as the car door slammed, cheers broke out. Neighbors, the same ones who once stayed silent, now stood united. One of them shouted, "You can't bully us anymore." Another called, "We stand with you, Mr. Carter." The victory wasn't loud or triumphant. It was earned. Hard, quiet, and heavy with meaning. Later that afternoon, the HOA clubhouse reopened, this time, not for a meeting, but for a press conference. Samuel sat at the front beside Agent Daniels. Cameras flashed. The new interim HOA board, neighbors elected overnight, stood proudly behind him. Daniels spoke first. For years, veterans across this state were targeted through fraudulent HOA practices. Mr. Carter's courage exposed it. Because of his actions, federal charges have been filed, and restitution will go to those wronged. Then he stepped aside. "Mr. Carter, the floor is yours." Samuel rose slowly. The room quieted. "I never wanted a fight," he began. "I just wanted to honor those who gave their lives for this country. But when honor becomes inconvenient to the powerful, that's when you find out what people are really made of. Some hide behind rulebooks. Others stand up and say, 'Enough.'" He looked around the room, eyes firm but kind. "Freedom isn't just something we defend overseas. It's something we protect right here, in our neighborhoods, our communities, our hearts. And as long as I can stand, I'll keep defending it." Applause swelled. People rose to their feet. Some wiped tears. As the crowd dispersed, Daniels leaned close and said, "You know, Whitman's arrest isn't the end. His partners are still out there, same network, different faces. We'll need testimony. Maybe even a voice the public trusts." Samuel gave a quiet smile. "If the mission's justice, you know where to find me." That night, Samuel returned home. The porch was quiet again. The metal case gleamed beneath the stars, repaired, unbroken, defiant. The flag behind the glass caught the soft glow of the moon. He sat in his chair, listening to the crickets, the whisper of peace he hadn't felt in years. Then, headlights swept across the yard. A car slowed in front of his house, not threatening this time, just watching. Samuel's eyes narrowed. The driver's silhouette lingered for a moment, then the car pulled away. Danielle's words echoed in his mind. His partners are still out there. Samuel leaned back, eyes on the horizon. Then I'll be ready, he murmured. The narrator's voice fades in, calm, solemn, powerful. Respect is easy to demand. Honor is harder to live by. Some men build their power on fear, others on truth, and when truth finally stands tall, even the mighty must kneel. Samuel Carter didn't just fight for his porch, he fought for every voice that was ever silenced by arrogance. But the shadows he exposed are only beginning to move. The camera pans to the metal case, light shimmering across the engraved words, "Freedom is never free."